The Delphi murders. Imagine two young girls going for a hike on a beautiful winter day. They're best friends, 8th graders enjoying a day off from school. They take selfies on an old railroad bridge, document their adventure, text their parents that they'll be ready for pickup soon. It's an ordinary afternoon in small-town America. Then they encounter someone on that bridge. One of the girls, sensing danger, quietly activates her phone's video recorder. The footage captures a man approaching them, his voice commanding them down the hill. It's the last anyone hears from them alive. The next day, their bodies are found in the woods near the bridge, murdered in a brutal attack that shocked their small Indiana community and captured national attention. But even more shocking, investigators had video of the killer from one of the victims' phones, they had audio of his voice, they had DNA evidence, and still it would take over 5 years to make an arrest. This is the story of the Delphi murders, the killing of Abigail Abby Williams and Liberty Libby German on February 13, 2017. It's a case that became one of the most discussed unsolved murders in America, generating thousands of tips, countless theories, and a dedicated following of people determined to see justice served. It's a story about two brave girls, one of whom had the presence of mind to record her own killer, providing evidence that would eventually help bring him to justice. It's about a small town forever changed by an act of horrific violence. And it's about how a case can remain unsolved for years despite having more evidence than most investigations ever collect. In October 2022, Richard Allen, a local pharmacy technician who'd lived in Delphi the entire time, was arrested and charged with the murders. As of 2024, he's awaiting trial, and the case that captivated millions may finally be approaching resolution. February 13, 2017, was a Monday, but it was also a snow day for students in Delphi, Indiana. School had been cancelled due to winter weather. For 13-year-old Abby Williams and 14-year-old Libby German, it was an unexpected day off, a chance to enjoy the unusually mild February afternoon. Abby and Libby were best friends, inseparable since elementary school. They did everything together, sleepovers, school activities, hanging out in their small town. Delphi, Indiana, population about 3,000, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where children could play outside without constant supervision, where violent crime was rare. The girls decided to spend the afternoon hiking the Delphi Historic Trails, a popular local spot featuring an old abandoned railroad bridge called the Monon High Bridge. The bridge, no longer in use, had become a destination for locals who enjoyed the thrill of walking across its weathered planks high above Deer Creek below. Libby's older sister Kelsey dropped the girls off at the trailhead around 1 p.m. The plan was for them to hike for a couple of hours, and then Libby's father Derek would pick them up around 3 p.m. It was a simple plan, the kind of thing the girls had done before. There was no reason to expect anything would go wrong. The trail system included several paths through wooded areas. The Monon High Bridge was about a mile into the trails, a dramatic structure spanning a creek gorge. The bridge was 60 feet high and about 850 feet long, made of old railroad ties with gaps between them. You could see straight down to the creek below. Walking across it required caution and confidence, but local teens frequently did it for the thrill. As Abby and Libby hiked, they took photos and videos, documenting their afternoon like any teenagers would. One photo showed them on the bridge, smiling and enjoying the day. Libby posted a photo to Snapchat around 2:07 p.m. showing Abby walking across the bridge. It was a beautiful, serene image, a young girl on an old bridge on a winter afternoon. What happened next has been pieced together from Libby's phone, witness statements, and the investigation. Somewhere on or near the bridge, the girls encountered a man. They likely passed him on the trail or the bridge, or he approached them from behind. Libby, perhaps sensing something was wrong, did something extraordinarily brave and quick-thinking. She activated her phone's video recording function. The phone was likely in her pocket or partially concealed, recording audio and brief snippets of video without the man knowing. The footage captured by Libby's phone would become some of the most analyzed evidence in modern true crime history. A still image extracted from the video shows a man walking toward the camera on the Monon High Bridge. He's wearing a blue jacket, jeans, a hat, and something covering his lower face. His hands appear to be in his pockets. His posture and gait have been scrutinized by thousands of people trying to identify him. The audio captured includes a man's voice saying, "Down the hill." The words are chilling in their casualness, their presumption of authority. Investigators believe this was the killer ordering the girls off the bridge and into the woods, where he would attack them. Around 3:30 p.m., Derek German arrived at the trailhead to pick up the girls. They weren't there. He called Libby's phone, no answer. He drove around the area, checking other possible locations where the girls might be. No sign of them. As minutes turned into hours with no contact, panic set in. This wasn't like the girls. They were responsible, they had their phones, they knew when to meet their ride. Something was very wrong. By evening, family members were searching the trails, calling the girls' names, looking for any sign of them. Around 5:30 p.m., police were officially notified that the girls were missing. Search and rescue teams were deployed, using flashlights and thermal imaging equipment to search the woods and trail area as darkness fell. The search continued through the night and into the next morning, February 14th. Volunteers from the community joined law enforcement, forming search lines and combing through the woods. Everyone hoped the girls had simply gotten lost or injured, that they'd be found cold and scared but alive. But on February 14th, around noon, searchers made a devastating discovery. About half a mile from the Monon High Bridge, in a wooded area near Deer Creek, they found the bodies of Abby Williams and Libby German. The girls had been murdered. The specific details of how they were killed have been largely kept secret by investigators, but it's known they died from violence inflicted by their killer. The scene suggested they'd been forced off the trail and into this secluded area, where the attack occurred. Libby's phone was found near the bodies. It would prove to be crucial evidence, containing not just the video and audio of the killer, but also other data that would help investigators understand the timeline and possibly identify the perpetrator. The murder of two young girls in a small town sent shockwaves through Delphi and captured national attention. The FBI joined the investigation, bringing additional resources and expertise. The case became one of the highest-profile unsolved murders in the country. On February 15th, just days after the bodies were found, police held a press conference and released the evidence from Libby's phone that would become central to the entire case. They released a grainy still image extracted from Libby's video, showing a man on the Monon High Bridge. The photo became known as Bridge Guy. He was described as a white male, possibly 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall, wearing a blue jacket, jeans, and a hat. The image was shared millions of times across social media and news outlets. They also released the audio clip, Down the Hill. The voice was male, mature, with what some described as a slight accent or unusual pronunciation. Investigators believed someone would recognize that voice. Finally, they released a police sketch based on witness descriptions. A woman who'd been on the trails that day had seen a man matching Bridge Guy's description and provided information to a sketch artist. The composite showed a man with a round face, appearing to be middle-aged. The response from the public was overwhelming. Tips poured in, thousands of them. The FBI set up a dedicated tip line. Billboards were erected across Indiana showing Bridge Guy's image and pleading for information. The case was featured on national television programs, including Dr. Phil and various true crime shows. But despite the massive response, no arrest was made. The person in the photo remained unidentified. Investigators chased down every lead, interviewed hundreds of people, but couldn't make a definitive connection to a suspect. The case began to take strange turns. In April 2019, more than 2 years after the murders, police held another press conference announcing they had new direction in the investigation. They released a different sketch of a suspect, this one showing a younger-looking man with different facial features than the original sketch. They also released additional audio from Libby's phone, adding the word guys before down the hill, making the full quote, guys, down the hill. Police said they believed the killer was likely local to Delphi or familiar with the area. They made the cryptic statement that the killer was likely in the room at one of their press conferences or would be watching the announcement. Superintendent Doug Carter of Indiana State Police made an emotional appeal directly to the killer, saying, "We know this is about power to you, and you want to know what we know. We likely have interviewed you or someone close to you." This announcement confused many observers. Why release a different sketch? Why say the killer had likely been interviewed? What new information had they received? The investigation appeared to focus on several individuals over the years. One man, Daniel Nations, was briefly considered a person of interest but was cleared. Another man who'd been arrested for an unrelated crime and had been in the area around the time of the murders was investigated but never charged. Various tips led police to interview numerous local residents, but no arrests were made. As years passed without resolution, the case became a source of frustration. How could a killer be photographed and recorded, in a small town where everyone knows everyone, and still not be identified? Some began to theorize the killer must have been a transient or someone from outside the area who'd never been interviewed. But investigators insisted they believed the killer was local, that they'd likely spoken to him, and that someone in the community knew who he was but either didn't realize it or was protecting him. Online communities formed dedicated to solving the Delphi murders. Amateur sleuths analyzed every frame of the video, every nuance of the audio, every detail released by police. Some theories were thoughtful and well-researched. Others devolved into unfounded accusations against innocent people, causing harm to individuals who happened to match the description or had been in the area that day. The FBI used advanced technology to enhance the video and audio, to extract every possible detail that might help identify Bridge Guy. Behavioral analysts studied the footage, trying to determine the suspect's age, occupation, physical condition, anything that might narrow the search. DNA evidence from the crime scene was sent to various labs for analysis. Genealogy databases were consulted, the same technique that had caught the Golden State Killer. But either the DNA wasn't suitable for such analysis, or it wasn't producing matches that led to a suspect. 5 years passed. Then, in October 2022, something changed. On October 26, 2022, Indiana State Police announced they'd made an arrest in the Delphi murders. Richard Matthew Allen, a 50-year-old Delphi resident, was taken into custody and charged with 2 counts of murder in the deaths of Abby Williams and Libby German. The arrest shocked the community and those who'd been following the case. Richard Allen wasn't a transient or an outsider. He'd lived in Delphi the entire time since the murders. He worked at a local CVS pharmacy where many Delphi residents, including potentially family members of the victims, had filled prescriptions and interacted with him regularly. Allen was married, seemed to live a quiet life, had no obvious criminal history beyond minor traffic violations. By all outward appearances, he was an ordinary middle-aged man working a regular job in a small town. How had investigators finally connected Richard Allen to the murders after more than 5 years? The exact details remain partially sealed as the case proceeds to trial, but some information has emerged through court filings and hearings. Richard Allen had actually been interviewed by police early in the investigation. In 2017, shortly after the murders, Allen contacted authorities saying he'd been on the trails on February 13. He said he'd been there between specific times, provided information about what he was wearing, and described seeing some juveniles on the trails. This interview was documented but somehow wasn't properly followed up on for years. In 2022, during a review of the case files, investigators realized Allen's own statements about being on the trails, combined with his described clothing, matched the description and timeline of Bridge Guy. They began looking at Allen more closely. A key piece of evidence that led to Allen's arrest was allegedly a statement he made placing himself on the Monon High Bridge at the relevant time period. Combined with additional evidence not yet publicly disclosed, this was enough for authorities to obtain a warrant for Allen's arrest. When investigators searched Allen's home, they reportedly found a gun that ballistics analysis connected to an unspent round found at the crime scene near the girls' bodies. This was significant physical evidence directly linking Allen to the location where the murders occurred. The arrest of Richard Allen raised many questions. How had investigators missed or failed to properly follow up on his 2017 interview for 5 years? Allen had essentially placed himself at the scene at the relevant time, matching the description of Bridge Guy, and this wasn't considered significant until 2022? Did Allen continue living and working in Delphi all those years knowing police had this information, believing he'd gotten away with it? Were there other pieces of evidence connecting Allen to the crime that haven't been publicly disclosed? Allen initially appeared in court and pleaded not guilty to the charges. His attorneys have argued that there's insufficient evidence to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They've suggested the case against him is circumstantial and that being on the trails that day doesn't prove he committed the murders. Allen has been held in custody since his arrest, denied bond due to the severity of the charges and the strength of the evidence against him. He's been moved between facilities for security reasons, eventually being held in a state prison rather than the local county jail. As pre-trial proceedings continue, various details have emerged. Allen allegedly made confessions while in custody, including to his wife during a phone call and to other inmates and prison staff. However, his defense team has argued these confessions may not be reliable, possibly resulting from mental health deterioration while in solitary confinement. The defense has claimed Allen has been treated improperly in custody, held in harsh conditions, and that his mental state has deteriorated, raising questions about whether he is competent to stand trial and whether any confessions were voluntary. The prosecution maintains they have substantial evidence connecting Allen to the murders beyond his presence on the trails that day, though much of this evidence remains sealed by the court until trial. The case has been subject to a gag order limiting what participants can publicly discuss, frustrating those who followed the case for years and want answers about what happened to Abby and Libby. As of 2024, Richard Allen remains in custody awaiting trial. The date has been set and postponed multiple times as both sides prepare their cases and various pre-trial motions argued. The trial, when it finally occurs, is expected to be one of the most closely watched proceedings in recent Indiana history. For the families of Abby and Libby, the arrest brought mixed emotions. Relief that someone was finally charged, but also frustration at how long it took and questions about whether mistakes were made that delayed justice. And of course, nothing can bring back their daughters, their granddaughters, their sisters. The arrest is a step toward justice, but it can't undo the loss. Becky and Mike Patty, Libby's grandparents who raised her, have been vocal advocates for their granddaughter and for justice. They've endured years of waiting, hoping, and dealing with the public nature of this case. Every press conference, every new lead that went nowhere, every anniversary of the murders, kept them reliving their worst day. Anna Williams, Abby's mother, has similarly had to navigate the impossible grief of losing her child to violence while the investigation played out in public. She's described Abby as a gentle soul who loved art and animals, a normal 8th grader with her whole life ahead of her. The Delphi community has been forever changed by these murders. The trails where Abby and Libby died have become a memorial site, with people leaving flowers, stuffed animals, and messages. Every February 13th, the community gathers to remember the girls and to renew their commitment to finding justice. The case has also raised important questions about crime solving in the modern era. How could a case with video and audio of the suspect, DNA evidence, and occurrence in a small town take 5 years to solve? The answer appears to be a combination of factors. The sheer volume of tips to process, the difficulty of matching the grainy image to a specific person, possible investigative missteps, and the suspect being someone who'd seemingly hidden in plain sight. What role does social media and amateur investigation play in cases like this? On one hand, the massive sharing of Bridge Guy's image kept the case in public consciousness and may have generated tips that ultimately helped. On the other hand, online speculation led to harassment of innocent people and possibly distracted from productive investigative avenues. How effective are emerging technologies like genealogy DNA databases in solving crimes? While these techniques have solved other cold cases, they apparently didn't produce results in Delphi's case, either due to the nature of the DNA evidence available or other factors. Looking forward, Richard Allen's trial will attempt to answer the questions that have haunted Delphi for years. Is Richard Allen truly the person captured in Libby's video? The prosecution will need to prove he was Bridge Guy beyond a reasonable doubt. What evidence connects him to the actual murders beyond being on the trails that day? The unspent round, the alleged confessions, and whatever other evidence has been kept sealed will be crucial. What was Allen's motive? Why would a seemingly ordinary pharmacy technician commit such a horrific crime against 2 children? Understanding motive isn't legally required for conviction, but juries and the public want to understand why. If Allen is convicted, how will the community process having unknowingly lived alongside the girl's killer for all those years? How many people patronized the CVS where he worked, had normal interactions with him, never suspecting what he'd allegedly done? The bravery of Liberty German cannot be overstated. At 14, in what must have been the most terrifying moment of her life, she had the presence of mind to activate her phone's video recording, creating evidence that would ultimately help identify her killer. She couldn't save herself or Abby, but she gave investigators the tools they needed to eventually bring their killer to justice. This act of courage has made Libby a symbol of bravery in the face of evil. Law enforcement officials have publicly stated that Libby's actions provided crucial evidence and likely prevented this from being an unsolved cold case. She's been posthumously honored by various organizations recognizing her heroism. The Delphi murders have become a case study in modern criminal investigation, in the challenges of solving crimes even with significant evidence, and in a community's resilience in the face of tragedy. When Richard Allen's trial concludes, whether in conviction or acquittal, it will mark the end of one chapter of this story. But for the families of Abby and Libby, the story never really ends. Their loss is permanent, their grief ongoing. Abby and Libby should be in their 20s now, finishing college, starting careers, falling in love, living their lives. Instead, they're frozen in time as 8th graders, forever young, their futures stolen on a February afternoon on a hiking trail that should have been safe. The Delphi community has shown remarkable strength and solidarity through this tragedy. They've supported the families, participated in searches and vigils, kept the case in public consciousness, and refused to let Abby and Libby be forgotten. As justice hopefully approaches, we must remember, this case isn't ultimately about Bridge Guy, or the investigation, or the technology used to solve it. It's about two young girls who deserve to grow up, who were killed senselessly, and whose memory should be honored by continuing to fight for justice for all victims of violence.